It was a legendary escape from a place that was supposed to be inescapable. 55 years ago this month, 3 men pulled off the impossible, breaking out of Alcatraz.
Alcatraz was never just steel and stone. It was a puzzle veiled in fog, a fortress of silence surrounded by dark waters. For generations, eyes have stared across San Francisco Bay toward that jagged silhouette, haunted by a single question: did they make it? In 2025, a chilling new detail has emerged. So precise, so deliberate, it's unraveling decades of certainty. What happened within those walls, and how close are we, right now, to finally knowing? Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, known as the Rock, wasn't just another prison. It was the government's final answer, a last stop for men the system couldn't contain elsewhere. Sitting 1.25 miles off San Francisco's coast, the island first served as a military stronghold in the 1850 before being reshaped in 1934 into the nation's most secure prison. Overseen by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Alcatraz was designed for maximum security and zero tolerance. It wasn't built for reform, it was built for silence. Its architecture reflected that. The main cell house, constructed between 1910 and 1912, held 4 blocks of reinforced cells, a mess hall, a medical wing, a library, and offices. Cells were narrow, stripped bare, fortified with tool-proof bars. Inmates were counted up to 13 times daily, watched under the strictest guard-to-prisoner ratio in the U.S. Armed watchtowers, tear gas rigs, and metal detectors turned every corridor into a trap. Even speech was rationed. To talk, to work, to see another face, you had to earn it. Existence on Alcatraz was rigid, cold, and unyielding. At peak, the prison housed 312 men, rarely at full capacity, yet brimming with legends. Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and others the press made infamous. The most feared were locked in D Block, known for the Hole, a row of isolation cells where light and sound went to die. No rehabilitation, no second chances, just control. Even within its walls, segregation ran deep. The system wasn't just about confinement, it was psychological warfare. Throughout its 29 years, the facility saw continuous upgrades: electrified fencing, new locks, stronger barriers. Security became its own religion. Yet time worked against the island. By the early 1000, 960 air had eaten into its structure. The buildings cracked. Rust crept across the bones of the prison. On March 21, 1963, Alcatraz was officially shut down. Too expensive, too decayed to continue. And still, it endures. Not as ruins, but as legend. A place where questions outlived the answers. A place that won't stay silent, not yet. Today, Alcatraz is no longer a fortress, but a ghost. Preserved by the National Park Service and walked by over 1 million visitors a year, its polished exhibits offer a glimpse into what was once the harshest prison in the United States. Behind refurbished corridors and restored cells lies a legacy of fear and finality, where the boundary between punishment and survival blurred to near invisibility. The walls held firm, but the legend grew stronger, until one night tore it wide open. Alcatraz was more than a prison, it was an idea. Set on a wind-lashed island in San Francisco Bay, it stood as the ultimate deterrent. It wasn't just where inmates served time, it was where hope went to die. Every brick, every routine, every policy was designed to crush the idea of escape. The myth wasn't born from rumors, it was fed by cold facts. In 29 years of operation, no escape had ever been confirmed. 14 attempts. Most ended in capture or bullets. A few disappeared beneath the waves, swallowed by the merciless tide and ice-cold currents. To try was to vanish. And that was the point. Alcatraz didn't just lock men up, it annihilated the dream of freedom. The belief that the Rock was unbreakable became its power. Guards, wardens, the public, all believed it. That illusion shattered in June 1962. Sometime between 10:30 and 11:00 p.m. on June 11, 3 men vanished from their locked cells: Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. And with them went the illusion. For the first time, Alcatraz had been outwitted. The psychological fallout was instant. A fortress had been pierced. A myth had cracked. But unlike every failed attempt before, this escape left no ending. only questions, and questions turned into obsession. The 1962 escape is no longer just a prison break. It is a fracture in history. The whereabouts of Morris and the Anglins remain unknown. Dead or alive, their disappearance cracked open a legend America had carried like gospel. The myth of the Rock never quite recovered. Frankly, Morris was never an ordinary prisoner. He was a product of institutions. Orphaned at 11, arrested at 13, his early life was fractured, transient. But from that instability, something sharp emerged: intellect. A mind trained not by teachers, but by survival. His rap sheet was long: armed robbery, drugs, multiple successful escapes. In 1960, after fleeing Louisiana State Penitentiary, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz. The system had one last card to play. But Morris wasn't there to serve time. From the moment he stepped onto the island, he was already planning how to leave it. In adjacent cells were John and Clarence Anglin, brothers he had known in other prisons, and Alan West. Familiar faces, familiar instincts. Quietly, in whispers through cell walls, they built a team. Morris led. Not with force, but precision. This wasn't desperation, it was architecture. Morris designed the escape as if it were a blueprint. Night after night, they chipped away at the crumbling concrete around their vents using stolen spoons, discarded saw blades, and a hand drill cobbled together from a vacuum motor. The salt in the air had weakened the prison's bones. They just helped it along. To hide their progress, Morris crafted false grills from paper mache, colored with scavenged paint. Even the noise of their drilling had a cover. Morris played his accordion during music hour, letting its wheeze mask the scrape of escape. There were no mistakes, only calculations. When the tunnels were ready, they didn't just climb out. They defied the very elements that made escape unthinkable. Over months, they stitched together over 50 raincoats into a makeshift raft and life vests, using steam pipes to seal the seams. A concertina was converted into an air pump. It was a madman's plan. Except it worked. Officially, they drowned. No bodies were found, but in 2013, a letter surfaced, allegedly from one of the Anglins, suggesting survival. True or not, the seeds were planted. Did they escape? Are they alive? Or did they vanish beneath the waves like so many others? No one knows. But what Morris proved is that even the most unbreakable system can be outsmarted. John and Clarence Anglin were more than just inmates. They were brothers forged in poverty, hardened by survival, and bound by an unshakable loyalty. Raised in rural Florida as two of 13 children in a farming family, the Anglins learned early that life was something you had to escape from. That bond, tested by hardship, would become the key to one of America's most enduring mystery. Their crimes, mostly bank robberies, were unremarkable, but their knack for slipping through bars wasn't. After repeated escape attempts at the Atlanta Penitentiary, the Anglins were sent to the one place designed to crush escape artists, Alcatraz. But instead of breaking them, the Rock reunited them with an old acquaintance, Frank Morris. Together again, the men were placed in adjacent cells, alongside another known associate, Alan West. The pieces were falling into place. With Morris as the architect, the Anglin brothers became the hands and heartbeat of the escape. By night, they chipped away at the crumbling concrete beneath their sink vents using metal spoons and broken saw blades. They molded papier-mâché vent covers, gathered materials during work detail, and concealed their progress with calculated precision. As Morris engineered, the Anglins executed. Their labor built more than a hole in a wall. They crafted life jackets and a massive 6-by-14-foot raft from over 50 stolen raincoats. They used steam pipes to seal the rubber and a modified concertina to inflate it, an improvised system as bold as it was brilliant. Knowledge of factory routines and supply routes gave them the tools. Every motion, every whisper, every glance was rehearsed. No guesswork, no second chances. And then there were the faces. The iconic dummy heads, sculpted from soap, toilet paper, and toothpaste, painted with stolen pigments, and crowned with real human hair swept from the barbershop floor. They were more than decoys. They were masks of freedom. With clothes and towels beneath their blankets mimicking the shape of sleeping bodies, the illusion was complete. On June 12, 1962, when guards made their morning rounds, they looked into the cells and saw what they expected: 3 sleeping men. But the cells were empty. The ghosts had already gone. What came after was silence. No alarms, no sounds in the night. The prison awoke to a mystery instead of an emergency. The aftermath was chilling. Years later, the trail refused to go cold. A 2013 letter claimed survival. Confiscated Christmas cards. A 1975 photo allegedly showing the Anglins alive in Brazil. No bodies were found, no bones, just fragments of possibility. If the brothers survived, they didn't just escape a prison, they vanished from history. Their greatest feat wasn't slipping past the guards. It was erasing themselves, completely. Crafting the illusion. What made the 1962 escape legendary wasn't just the digging, or even the raft. It was the deception. The escapees didn't vanish by brute force. They vanished by crafting an illusion so convincing it fooled one of the most secure prisons in America. The lifelike dummy heads were the centerpiece. Made from soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper, molded with uncanny precision, they were painted to match skin tones using stolen art supplies. Topped with human hair gathered from the barber shop, they were placed on pillows, barely visible beneath blankets, just enough to pass a glance. And that's all they needed. Guards didn't wake prisoners during checks. They looked for signs of life. Stillness was expected. The illusion worked. It wasn't until morning roll call that the truth shattered the silence. But the trickery didn't stop at the pillows. The prisoners also camouflaged the very walls of their cells. They carved tunnels behind the air vents, then disguised the openings with covers made from cardboard and paper mache, carefully painted with pages torn from the prison library to resemble rusted grills. The deception was so precise that a casual glance would see only sealed steel, but behind those false panels, a tunnel to freedom waited. Silent and gaping. This wasn't improvisation, it was theater. A performance staged in cells under the noses of guards who didn't know they were watching a show. FBI agent Michael Dyke, who investigated the case years later, described it perfectly. They didn't just dig out, they rehearsed a performance. Every detail, every head, every vent, every sound was part of a larger script, and when the curtain rose, the men were gone. This kind of illusion wasn't new to the world's prisons, but rarely had it been done with such artistry. False walls, forged uniforms, hidden letters, yes. But Alcatraz? Alcatraz was different. This wasn't just escape, this was erasure. The Anglins and Morris didn't just outsmart guards, they outsmarted legend. For one night, their cells became a stage, and they disappeared, not just from prison, but into myth. Their escape didn't begin in the bay, it began in the concrete, and that, more than anything, is what still terrifies historians, guards, and lawmen to this day. Not that they got out, but how. They didn't run, they tunneled, quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface, with spoons, with wire, with stolen grit and broken parts. They used the prison's own flaws, its salt-damaged infrastructure, its routines, its assumptions, against it. They lived among walls they knew better than their builders, and on the night it mattered, they stepped through them. The rock didn't break, it was hollowed from the inside out, and when the tide came in, it carried away more than 3 men. It carried away the myth of Alcatraz. Frank Morris, John and Clarence Anglin, and Alan West discovered their opening not in open defiance, but in decay. Behind the air vents beneath their sinks lay salt-eaten concrete, crumbling quietly with time. It was their chance, and they took it. Over months, they chipped at the weakened structure, using spoons stolen from the mess hall and discarded saw blades. But what truly set their plot apart was the homemade drill, crafted from a vacuum cleaner motor, an improvised tool built to chisel a way out from inside a fortress designed to hold the unbreakable. They didn't rely on brute force. Their plan demanded silence, disguise, and patience. By day, the escape holes were covered with cardboard and vent grills fashioned from paper mache. Painted with library art supplies to blend into the prison walls, they escaped notice, even under scrutiny. The rhythm of Music Hour, with Morris squeezing notes from his accordion, masked the steady scrape of digging. The noise was concealed in plain sound. When the tunnels were finally wide enough, the men slipped into a forgotten maintenance corridor. Above the cell block, hidden from guards, they built a workshop, constructing tools of freedom in the prison's own shadows. The upper level, once part of the old military fort, had rotted with time. Where others saw ruin, they saw refuge. Climbing 30 feet of pipes, they reached the roof. The ventilation shaft was pried open, the cover sealed back with a soap-carved bolt. With this final act of mimicry, the escape route was complete. They hadn't just exploited the prison's physical decay, they had manipulated its design, its complacency, and its arrogance. In the end, they built more than a tunnel. They built the only clean escape in Alcatraz's history. The tunnel led them out of prison, but not off the island. Awaiting them was their greatest trial, San Francisco Bay, cold, black, merciless. The waters between Alcatraz and the mainland were infamous, but the trio had prepared. In their hidden workshop, they stitched together more than 50 stolen raincoats, forming a 6x14-foot raft and life vests. Thread came from prison work areas. Rubber seams were melted shut using steam pipes. A concertina, modified into a makeshift air pump, brought the raft to life. Even the paddles were homemade, scraps of plywood scavenged and shaped with purpose. On the night of June 11, 1962, they launched the raft from the northeast shore. Their destination, Angel Island, under 2 miles away. They disappeared into darkness. No alarms, no final word. The silence didn't last. 3 days later, a paddle washed ashore. That same day, a sealed package containing the Anglin's belongings was found. A week after, fragments of the raft floated near the Golden Gate Bridge, along with a homemade life vest. But of the men, officials, led by then-Warden Richard Willard, insisted the escapees drowned. Yet others weren't so sure. The raft's construction, the sheer intelligence behind it, suggested otherwise. Later, scientific studies supported a narrow window during which survival was possible. Whether they perished in the waves or reached land, one truth remained. The raft was more than an escape device. It was a rebellion, an act of defiance against the most secure prison ever built. Alan West was meant to go with them. He helped plan every detail, dug with the same spoons, built the same decoys, and prepared the same materials. He had served at Alcatraz since 1957, had known Morris and the Anglins from other prisons, and shared a cell block wall. He was one of them, until the very end. On June 11, 1962, West couldn't get out. His tunnel, just inches too narrow, refused to open. In desperation, he hacked at the final bit of concrete, but time ran out. The others left. West was alone, trapped by a miscalculation and the weight of opportunity slipping through his fingers. By morning, the guards discovered the escape. West, still in his cell, confessed. He told investigators everything about the corridor, the rooftop, Angel Island. He pointed to evidence, the paddle, the belongings. But the escapees had vanished, and West's cooperation raised suspicion. Had they changed their plans to protect themselves from betrayal, or had West simply missed the moment? When Alcatraz closed in 1963, West was transferred to another prison. He completed his sentence. Forgotten by most, he remained the only man to witness the plan and its execution in full. He escaped the cold of the bay, but not the cold of regret. In Alcatraz's mythology, West became the last man standing. In 2013, 5 decades after the escape, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Police Department. It was signed John Anglin. The words were direct. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. The letter claimed Frank Morris had died in 2005, Clarence Anglin in 2008. John, terminally ill, offered to surrender in exchange for medical care. It was enough to reignite a case long believed closed. The FBI launched a quiet reinvestigation. The letter underwent forensic testing, handwriting analysis, DNA comparisons, fingerprint examinations. But the results were murky. Nothing matched conclusively. The samples yielded no solid proof. the signature of the mystery remained intact. Was it a final message from a dying man, or an elaborate hoax echoing the escape's genius in psychological warfare? No answers, just shadows. The letter felt real enough to disturb the silence, yet flimsy enough to be doubted. No fingerprints, no verified DNA, but it was just credible enough to linger. For years, the public knew nothing of it, until 2018, when CBS affiliate KPIC exposed the story. The timing, the tone, the quiet desperation in the words, all of it poured fresh oxygen into a mystery that refuses to die. The letter wasn't the first clue. For decades, the Anglin family claimed to receive unsigned Christmas cards. There was even a debated photograph from 1975, allegedly showing John and Clarence alive in Brazil. And now, this. A handwritten confession suggesting survival, state hopping, and a life spent hidden in plain sight. The U.S. Marshals Service, still holding jurisdiction over the case, has never closed the file. In 2022, they released age-progressed images of Morris and the Anglins, a public appeal disguised as an invitation. Look again. Some believe the men drowned, others see too many questions unanswered. Whatever the truth, that 2013 letter brought something few clues ever had: urgency. Whether a dying man's confession or an elaborate prank, it clawed closer to truth than any document before it. What makes the letter particularly haunting is how it echoes something larger: our cultural hunger for unsolved legends and those who vanish without a trace. In a world drowning in surveillance and digital footprints, the idea that 3 fugitives could disappear completely feels almost mythic. It calls back to folk heroes and ghost stories, D.B. Cooper, Billy the Kid. It tugs at something primal. When the underdog beats the system, said former U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke in 2016, people love a good mystery. But fascination doesn't come only from the idea that they survived. It's what their survival would mean. That even in America's most fortified cage, cracks existed. That somewhere, in a rigid system built on walls and rules, a seam split open just long enough for freedom to slip through. And just when the trail seemed cold, science entered where myth could only guess. For years, officials insisted no one could survive the swim from Alcatraz. The bay was too cold, the currents too cruel. Warden Richard Willard said as much in a 1964 BBC interview. Do you think you could make it? He didn't. Most didn't. That belief formed the bedrock of the official stance. In 1979, the FBI closed the case. The men were declared dead. It was over. But science had other plans. In 2014, Dutch researchers used advanced modeling to recreate the tide patterns on the night of June 11, 1962. Their findings shook the foundation of the story. If Morris and the Anglins launched between 11 p.m. and midnight, right when most believed they did, the current could have carried them directly to Angel Island. Not a wall of water, but a highway. If their timing was precise, survival was not only possible, that single revelation revived everything. The letter, the photo, the paddle, the raft fragments. What once seemed like debris now looked like evidence. What once seemed impossible now fit perfectly within reach. Maybe they didn't just plan an escape. Maybe they executed it to the letter. The study didn't just prove a theory, it shifted the conversation, from speculation to serious consideration. Still, some investigators refuse to let go of the old narrative. They argue that men like Morris and the Anglins couldn't have vanished into quiet, lawful lives, not without leaving a mark. But the file remains open. As of 2022, age-enhanced images are still being released. The Marshals haven't quit. Neither has the mystery. If science has done anything, it's peeled away the last veil between folklore and fact. The escape from Alcatraz, once dismissed as doomed, is now seen as perhaps the greatest prison break in American history. A story where timing, intelligence, and the overlooked decay of a fortress allowed 3 men to do the unthinkable. But more than anything, it is the lasting idea that captivates us. That the system, no matter how fortified, isn't perfect. That somewhere behind the walls of power, there's always a flaw, a loose brick, a weakness in the tide. Did they make it, or did the bay take them? Maybe the better question is, How close were they to disappearing forever?